Hi, I have John Sukup here with me today, and we're going to be talking about LLMs and agents and how you build. This is part of the series really focusing on cross-disciplinary folks who bring with them a whole set of different skills when they're thinking about building, not just builders, but people also have a sense of the business and product and how people use applications. And so I'm really excited to have John here. John, welcome.
All right, Matt, thanks a lot. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Maybe you can give everyone a little background on kind of what brings you to this moment and how what you're building and how you're thinking about this cool world of agents.
Sure. So, I've been in the industry in the data industry one way or another for pretty much my entire, I guess it's going on 19 years
That's
now.
not to count.
Uh, yeah, it's really happened quite quickly. At least it seems in my mind. I actually started out in consumer market research at the very beginning of my career in data analytics and survey programming and survey creation, and did that for about 7 years, and actually ended up at the Nielsen company. So the one company that most people that know one company in consumer market research know the Nielsen company, because then they say, "Hey, why did you cancel my TV show?" because of Nielsen TV ratings. And I never worked in that specifically, but after being in that industry for that amount of time, which wasn't very long, I started to get kind of fed up with the way that we treated data and the way that we captured so-called insights from consumers. It was all surveys and focus groups, and people are just horrible at, describing like things they did in the past, things they plan to do in the future, things they did 5 minutes ago, right? So asking someone in a survey, I said, this data is not very good. We need to come up with another way. And I remember approaching my boss's boss at the time with an idea that nowadays is probably commonplace, but back then I don't think anyone had heard of it. I said, why don't we go online to like social media or online bulletin boards like Reddit, and essentially scrape people's comments off of those websites and analyze the text to see what people's sentiment is towards a certain brand or a certain product. So basically, sentiment analysis from natural language processing, which is one of the cornerstone elements of not only machine learning, but especially now large language models and therefore AI agents. And they said that idea, we're going to keep doing surveys and focus groups. And I said, this is where I think the world is going. I think machine learning, AI, this is going to be where things are headed. And this was, what, 11 years ago, I guess now, 12 years ago. So I set off on a different path and basically have become, a self-trained practitioner in machine learning and AI. I've taught classes on AI. I built businesses on AI. Again, using the term AI kind of loosely to encompass both machine learning, data science, predictive analytics, but established my company Expected X about 10 years ago now, after I moved out of Chicago. And we've changed course a couple times. We're actually kind of in the process of changing direction right now, but very focused on AI still. A lot of the things that I mentioned, like I said at Nielsen, came true. Now it's pretty commonplace to go and use sentiment analysis for gleaning information about customers, pros and cons about your product or service. So when I look back now, I think I must have chosen the right path to go down, and glad it's brought me here today.
When you think about some of those moments at Nielsen, did they was there resistance because they couldn't imagine the future you were describing, or is it a cost concern, or was it a like what were the types of issues that were sort of holding them up from just leaning in?
I think it's, I don't think it was anything specific to Nielsen. I think if I worked for Ipsos or the Cambridge Group or any of these other large research organizations. It's just anything that's change or disruption is scary. We're all humans, so I mean, even if we're not talking about business, change and disruption for most people is a frightening, affair to deal with. So I think for Nielsen, they said, they're an old company, right? They've been around for over 100 years now, I think. And I think that was probably, we've been doing this for not, at that time 95 years. Why would we change, right? Like, we're still making money, we're still doing things, we still got customers. We don't need to change. And I think that was it. Not necessarily that they thought, that AI or sentiment analysis was some sort of like snake oil type of opportunity. I think it was just, anyone, when they get set in their ways and they're a dinosaur of a company, that trying to move in one direction or another is very
difficult.
challenging.
Yeah, no, I had a similar experience many years ago around streaming of video and interactive experiences. And there just was a gap in people's sort of readiness to lean into building where you'd have to assume that bandwidth would open up, compute would open up, and that some of those capabilities would become ubiquitous. And the comment at the time was, well, sure, some people will have reasonable streaming, but then, that's on their giant PC sitting under their desk and they're, multi-$1,000. Like, no, well, it'll happen elsewhere. It'll happen on these devices that are yet to come called phones and whatnot, in our pockets. And sometimes it's just the imagination. I think we're seeing some of that right now with the language models, and some of the ways in which language models are being used. Some folks are just reproducing what they've already seen, but others are starting to try to, jump some of those concept gaps and really lean into what's possible with them. And you have the benefit of an international reach, right? You're not just, working with folks here in the US, you're working with folks all over. What are you seeing in terms of the types of thinking, and what people are trying to achieve, and where you're pushing LLMs?
Well, I think, there's obviously countries within the world right now that are much further ahead in the AI space, mostly the US and China. Europe kind of treating them as the EU rather than any individual country. I think that they're moving up, probably in third place in that metric. But there's other regions too, particularly Southeast Asia, which has really embraced building out AI capabilities. And that's not just in the talent aspect, but also in the infrastructure aspect. And a lot of the trade war between the U.S. and China has really sparked that. So both China and the U.S. are kind of descending upon the ASEAN region, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and trying to kind of build out their presence in those locations. So I know that a lot of the CEOs from, I want to say, Amazon, Google, Intel, have all visited the region, have all basically, invested or promised to invest in data centers within the area. So kind of making it a Asian centralized hub without actually having to, go into China and, pretty much like not even allowed to do that based on the current situation. So I think that, this area, and I say this area because that's where I'm at right now, is definitely benefiting from that growth in AI. I think too, though, that there's still a lot of ways to go. From my firsthand experience here, the government is slowly building offices and institutions to try and develop AI in those capacities that I mentioned earlier within their local market, but they're also trying to attract a lot of external talent in order to, bridge that gap between where they're at right now and where they want to be, to in order to, basically accelerate those plans going from essentially nothing 10 years ago to trying to be competitive in the markets with, again, the US and China. China's probably ultimately going to benefit the most just because of proximity, and, these countries don't have the same relationship with the United States. And trade is, much more active, obviously, because it's a much shorter distance. But I'm interested to see how things kind of pan out, between this region and the other regions of the world, because they're definitely investing a lot right now in terms of talent, infrastructure, and so forth.
Well, I'm curious, where do you think the focus is in terms of application of AIML and language models? Like where are you seeing what types of applications are being built? What are you being asked to build?
Yeah, yeah. I think that there really isn't an area or an industry that people haven't at least had the thought, how can AI improve this, automate this, make this better? Even in just the past few years, or yeah, past few years. I mean, but let's be honest. This whole talk about what we call AI and LLMs are basically synonymous, right? When we talk about AI, we're really talking about some sort of large language model underpinning. But it's really only been around for a couple of years. Chat GPT came out, I think, in September of 2022, I want to
Yep.
say.
Yeah, really
And
hit hard
obviously
in
things have
23.
really hit hard, and it's been a landslide of everything ever since then. So I think everyone's really jazzed up about how can I apply AI to my business. So I wouldn't say that there's any particular industry or any particular workflow. I think a lot of companies right now are kind of stuck in the chatbot era, and they kind of see that as maybe table stakes to get into the AI game. A lot of websites you go on now, they have that little icon in the lower right hand corner. Oh, do you want to chat with someone? And obviously that's not a someone, that's a something. But that has really proliferated around most businesses. um, so I mean, I think that this is something that is kind of common. I think we saw this too with machine learning, is that a lot of companies really just want to have something that they can call AI enabled within their company, to either please the shareholders, to let their own staff and customers feel like they're on the cutting edge. Um, so I would say that industry wise, it's pretty much agnostic in terms of applications. In terms of the applications themselves, I'd say a lot of companies are working on chatbots. So building like RAG based models for answering customer inquiries based on their knowledge base. Um, and another thing that's actually, I think, coming around right now, which sometimes it's AI enabled, sometimes it's not, is just workflow automation.
Hmm.
So you're seeing a lot of companies embracing low code, no code tools like N8N, Zapier, which has been around for a while, for basically creating automated workflows using a no code environment where they just have a node, like a graph structure for perform step
Sure.
one, then send it to node two, perform step two. Sometimes those involve LLM agents if there has to be some sort of like web scraping or further tool access. But it seems like those are the two areas right now where a lot of companies are focusing: chatbots enabled by LLMs, and probably back-end RAG models, and also workflow automation. Custom solutions, that's kind of my focus, but those are maybe not as prevalent or readily visible at the moment.
Well, I'd love to dig into those a little more, but I think it's interesting how in late 23, early 24, as people started to rediscover vector databases. It wasn't like it was a technology that hadn't existed previously. It certainly had, but people were rediscovering it. The RAG becomes very prevalent. Everyone's talking about the RAG. But at this point, the multi-turn interaction with a RAG behind it, as you said, that chatbot with the RAG, the has become a centerpiece, if you will, of a lot of people's strategies. And it was interesting to watch people move from, oh, look, I can put all my enterprise data into a RAG and get some of it out and summarize it in an interesting way. Well, that's wonderful, but really humans don't want to do a one-shot query. They actually want to have a conversation. And so it morphed very smoothly, it seems, into the quote unquote agent, where now you can have that first conversation that pulls some information out, then you can have that second and third conversation. And I'm very curious about now you're adding workflow to that. So what's interesting to me on as you start to move from the conversation into the workflow and breaking it down into tasks is that quite often, if you're going to go and build out a set of tasks, if you're an operations team, sales ops or rev ops or whomever you happen to be, you don't want it to work differently every time. You really want it to work the same
Right.
way every time, which then leads to the question of, well, okay, is the LLM the right way to do it? I mean, and how do you sort of put that together? How have you approached that problem?
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's very common, and I think it's something that's kind of overlooked by a lot of organizations that want to do the keep up with the Joneses and jump onto the LLM bandwagon for whatever application it is. But largely, LLMs are non-deterministic, right? So every time you could put the exact same prompt into a lot of LLMs, and this is maybe not necessarily the same because language is well that when you think about programming, programming is very deterministic, right? 2 plus 2 equals 4. It's always going to come out the same way. Language, even though language models are non-deterministic and you might not necessarily receive the same exactly worded response every time you engage an LLM or a RAG based tool, you still hope that you're going to get the same response, maybe just worded differently. So it's a matter of semantics rather than a matter of, oh, a hallucination where, one day it's telling me, the capital of Illinois is Springfield. The next day it's telling me the capital of Illinois is Indianapolis. Um, so, there's obviously distinctions between complete errors in judgment by LLMs, as well as just I'm telling you the same thing, but maybe my output that I generate is using slightly different words. So, the tools now, and I think that this is becoming a big thing as well for what has become called context engineering in the software development, the AI enabled software development world, are two elements of what the LangChain team, which is one of the early practitioners or developers of AI agents as a framework, have lumped into what they call context engineering, and that's memory as well as state and history. So most LLM tools nowadays are capable of inherently having some sort of memory capacity, right? And when they make mistakes, users can correct those mistakes, keeping that human in the loop aspect as well, into something as simple as, say, a markdown file. So, for example, in my work, I mentioned before the recording that I was moving expected X into a slightly different direction, and some of that direction is based off of building software prototypes using this AI-enabled approach in order to make things, speedily, go to market much quicker, validate quicker, fail faster, whatever you want to call it. So a lot of the tools now, specifically within kind of the software development capacity that use AI agents, have this memory and state capability. So if you're creating something with code, for an example, you're writing something in TypeScript or Python or what have you, and a function gets created and that function doesn't work correctly because of some syntax error, which again, this is doesn't happen as much as it maybe did even 6 months ago because these tools are improving so rapidly. But the ability to essentially create a file within your file system, within your project, that is a memory, a set of rules for your LLM agent to follow. So I could see an error that occurs when creating a particular function, and I could see as a human that knows how to program what that error is, and I can go into my file or even tell my LLM, hey, you made a mistake, update your memory so that you don't make this mistake again. So LLMs are becoming much more uh, easy to interact with and add kind of that memory base to, because their context windows are growing. I think like Gemini 2.5 Pro has like a million token context window, which is pretty incredible. I think the next best is like Claude Code, or I should say Claude Sonnet or Claude Opus, which I think is like 200,000, 250,000 token window. The ability to actually correct LLMs in an easy fashion and add it to their memory, I think, is starting to slowly resolve the issue of the non-deterministic capabilities of these models. And I think that that's really changing how companies are adopting it. It's funny because it's kind of like, we've gone from like the very highly deterministic software programming where, if you miss a comma in your, line 5005 of your code, everything breaks. With LLMs, it's like, oh, we had this much more kind of like nebulous beginning, and now we're slowly starting to like tighten even LLMs into be a much more deterministic tool over time.
Well, I mean, it is amazing when you're writing prompts and you're tuning prompts. A comma can make all the difference in the
Right,
right
right,
place.
right. Yep,
I mean, and this is
yep.
kind of leads me to the memory, which is we talked about. You talked about multi-turn or chatbots and RAG and people having conversations and the importance of that. But we're starting to see more and more long-running conversations, people trying to solve problems where a person's going to interact with this agent on the other side, not just for a few minutes to solve a policy question or to get their, how much do I have in my checking account, but rather to start to interact with this agent over a period of weeks, potentially months or years, which then makes memory all the more important. But then memory is not just as simple as a regurgitation of the entire conversation that happened previously. Now it's something you actually have to spend some time and think about. Have you had the opportunity to really lean in and start to play with some different techniques in building that space?
I mean, not personally. I understand kind of the prevailing approach now to memory, because again, it comes back to obviously the cost of storage. Is one thing for saving things, saving responses, saving state, saving memory from a conversation. But it also comes like, how do we create a way to minimize the tokens used? So a lot of these LLMs that are accessed through APIs, you get a certain number of tokens or calls, I should say, per month, and after that you have to start paying more. And some of these services like Claude Code, which I personally use, can cost up to $100, $200 per month if you go for their max plan. The technique that seems to be most common now is compacting. So basically taking a existing conversation until it reaches a certain capacity of how much can be held in the current working memory of an LLM. And then once it reaches that threshold, it triggers another LLM backend for basically summarizing that information, crunching it down into a much more a smaller chunk of tokens, and then pushing that off into some sort of backend, like you said, vector database or whatever memory store is being used. Now, there's a couple of issues with that, and I think that this is actually a really this is really germane to the conversation about what's happened with some IDEs that have really soared to popularity over the past, I wouldn't even say year, probably 6 months.
You're talking
So
about all
one of
the
these IDEs.
co-pilots, like, yeah.
Exactly, all the co-pilots. Now this is an issue, and I think that this is the writing's basically on the wall that something needs to be done. So the IDE that I used to use, now I used to use VS Code, and then Cursor came along. Now everyone that's in the industry that has done any software development with AI agents knows Cursor, because they have been one of the most commonly used tools. They were kind of the first IDE, actually based off of a fork from GitHub of VS Code. So
Yep.
the interface and everything
Very
looks the
familiar.
same. So Cursor, exploded at the beginning of 2025, and I jumped on the bandwagon. And I bought the subscription. I used it. Worked very well, but it has started to deteriorate. And one of the reasons, and this isn't the only sole reason, but one of the reasons that it's deteriorated is because of compaction. So when you write a prompt within Cursor, and you use even an Anthropic model or a Google model, it will compact your prompt. It will compact your conversation history and pass that on to the LLM, and then the LLM will perform some sort of code generation task. And the longer that this has been going on, the less reliable the results have become, because Cursor is, well, in their mind, they're trying to save you calls and tokens, right? You're saying, well, you just wrote this like 200,000 token prompt. I'm going to have to smash that down into something a little bit more reasonable. So this has been a problem that has impacted Cursor, which they're starting to realize that their developers are more concerned with getting actual results, and they're willing to pay more money to get better results than get subpar results and save money, because Cursor's performing this service for them. So compaction is kind of the I think the current approach to memory stabilization, cost stabilization. But does it work? It seems that it works, maybe for saving money, but I switched out of Cursor. I went to Claude Code very recently. So it's the same model. So Cursor can also use Claude Sonnet, Claude Opus, version 4. Cursor uses those too. The only difference between accessing Claude Code's version is that it doesn't perform the compaction. It gives the allowance of the full context window, which means the results are much more performative compared to Cursor. So a lot of people have jumped ship on Cursor because of that. The pricing model has kind of gone all over the place as well. So yeah. So I think
They're
that
on a
the
journey.
techniques that you mentioned earlier, they're on a journey, right? Yeah. They
Well, we
as soon as, but
appreciate
they
it. We
got
appreciate that they're on that journey. I think you're
true,
also,
true.
I was going to say, I think you're also highlighting something that's really unique to this moment in time. And I think it happens occasionally when there are momentous shifts. I would argue that Kubernetes and Docker was a similar moment, and there's been a few others, where there's a fair amount of sharing of information and knowledge, and people are tracking what's coming, even if they haven't necessarily hit it yet themselves, and yet they're still dealing with. You're hitting enough of the challenges, you can kind of see the road. This is the road I'm going to have to take, and so people are paying attention, talking about different solutions and how to solve the problems. And I think it's moving the whole community forward much faster. So I appreciate the fact that Cursor and Windsurf and GitHub Copilot and all the others have been very open in talking about kind of their mechanisms and how they're performing this, because it helps all of us as we try to figure out, as we see the trajectory and scale, because as we're all building, we're all going to face scale issues, but of different types, right? It could be an infra scale problem, it could be a user experience scale problem, it could be a response time, all different types. I think the workflow example you gave earlier is a really good one. I've heard of people using LLMs to generate take workflow and generate static code, but it's still LLM generated. But then once they execute it, it's executed, statically, so they know precisely how it performed on any given instance. But the generation of it was all done via, um, you know, essentially delegated to an LLM, and not via a cursor or a windsurf, but actually as a unit, as a pipeline that actually generates an entire rule structure. I think it's fascinating, all these different approaches. But it does call to mind, like, how do you know if it's good enough or not? And this is, I think, kind of the what you're leaning into with the compaction. But all this compaction happened. Maybe they couldn't predict over this long time horizon that when you're writing that many lines of code and having that many conversations, that it would start to break down. But even if we come back to simpler problems, let's take the chatbot again with the RAG, that everyone right now is dealing with. How have you tackled thinking about evaluation and your metrics and your baselines? How have you approached some of those problems, especially with your ML background?
Okay, right. I mean, with ML, typically it's very easy to determine, how well a model is performing, right? I mean, the entire ML ops field is designated to monitor model performance over time and retrain degrading models and basically continue the cycle over and over and over again.
But that's
Because
great if you're
again,
building a model. What
right,
if you're
right,
what if you're consuming a model? You're not a builder, right? You don't have those. You don't necessarily know the weights and everything that's inside.
right. I think right now, I don't know if there's really another way around it, that there's still going to have to be a human element in order to evaluate the performance of language-based models, especially if the resulting output from whatever tool we're building is language-based, right? So I don't know of another way. There's countless benchmarking tools out there right now. So every time a new LLM comes out, unless it's a general purpose LLM or it's based on, it's trying to perform something specific, like it's designed specifically for coding or mathematics or high level reasoning or, problem solving, what have you. There's a whole ecosystem of benchmarks out there where it's, if I feed this into an LLM, is the LLM going to give me this result? But again, those are all based off of um, human evaluation, right? So I think it's, if the output of an LLM tool is language based, then I don't think that there's really any way for us to evaluate other than comparing it to what a human would say themselves. Now, if the LLM is, is behind a curtain, so to speak, and is performing something behind the scenes, and the output gets passed through several different layers or filters of something else programmatic, then maybe it would be easier to understand. If the LLM is just doing the coordination behind the scenes to do something more deterministic where the user is involved, then I think it's much easier for us to determine uh, how that is performing. But for most use cases now that we see LLMs, people are using the output, the direct output of an LLM or a agentic system of LLMs as the result that they're seeking, which is usually some sort of text output. And that could be the text of a chatbot. That could be the code that's being created in a co-pilot. So I'm kind of interested to see exactly like how do we evaluate these tools on maybe a different level that doesn't involve the human element. Because even then, like my perception of the color blue versus your perception of the color blue, it's not going to be exactly the same, right? So it's a very interesting question, and I'm not sure I know the answer. Obviously, we can do things with prompt engineering to really create prompts that generate consistent results, and a lot of LLM developers like Anthropic and Google and Meta, they've all created guides for their LLMs, like how to prompt it to get the best results. But again, like evaluating those outputs. Um, I don't know. I think it's an interesting question that's
Well,
still out there.
I think you're really touching on something critical there, which is the whatever your evaluation metrics are, it's not as simple as just a timing number or a binary, yes, it succeeded or it didn't, or it compiled or it didn't. You can't get a coverage map that you just simply look at and say, oh, I have code coverage from my unit testing across everything except for this one area. You just, all that's out the window. And so then it does become a human question of, well, how do you articulate what good enough is? And can you now um, essentially destructure that into a set of, well, we call them checks, but a set of analyses of the output to say, yep, that's good or bad or whatever. And then it becomes a human question of, well, it becomes a trend line, right? Is that trend line good enough or not? And I think it is a fascinating area to see kind of how people are thinking about what does it look like. And I do wonder if it's one of the limitations to where the larger pieces are going, because that sense of risk. What are we where are we willing to apply ML and language models? And I think that ultimately there's some sort of loop there of you can do a lot of, I'll put in quotes, magical things with them and lean into it, but you at the end of the day need to know you can trust as well. And I agree with you. It's humans at the end of the day, humans are going to be involved in trying to figure out whether the stuff is working or not, because it's we're not yet to the point where things are so well understood and structured that it can just be automated 100%. There has to be some touch.
Right. Right. And I honestly, like, the longer that I've been in the field, and I mean, I read about LLMs, AI every single day, like it or not. Lose sleep at night trying to keep up with what's the latest thing that's coming out tomorrow because we don't know. Um, I think that it's going to be harder for the products themselves to be something that utilizes AI in like the front end capacity, where
Hmm.
it's like a user facing piece. I think what the applications of AI are going to be, at least for the near term until the models become better, and they're already pretty great, is using AI to generate and perform some of the same tasks that we do now. So again, like using AI to generate code for a software tool that doesn't necessarily use anything with AI. It's just the ability, a tool. It's a tool, but is it an end in itself? Is like AI something that it's an AI tool, or is it something that people are actually going to use directly? And I think that what we're going to see is that, because, again, of that non deterministic nature, because we can't necessarily trust the results always, because it can write code that looks beautiful but is full of security holes, is that AI is at this point really just a tool, or should be a tool, for creating things that have already been kind of in existence. So for writing code, but for creating software that maybe nothing in the actual software that goes in front of the consumer has an AI element. It was created with the help of AI, and therefore we were able to push it out the door and iterate and prototype much faster, but there might not be any element of a user able to directly access AI. And I think that that's probably going to be the shift that we see, because you open up every software tool right now and it's got something AI in it. I opened up Adobe PDF the other day. It's got an AI assistant. I opened up
Everyone
Word.
has a
It's got an
banner.
AI assistant.
AI
Yeah,
coming.
every AI coming, everything AI. And my thought is that, I think people are already becoming kind of overwhelmed just by hearing AI this and that. I have my own personal experience trying to validate business ideas. As soon as I mention AI, people are rolling their eyes and, oh, another AI, this or that. Um, but I think that, what we're seeing right now is companies trying to put, like, integrate chatbots or AI, features into their software. Some are okay because some work, as intended. But I think that the shift is just going to be, we're going to stop trying to have AI as a direct element of our product or software, and we're just going to use it as a means to develop that software faster than we could, previously with our development team. So quicker cycles, quicker sprints if you're doing agile, and able to add features to your tool in days rather than months. We'll see if that's what happens. But again, if these models get to a point where they are performative and they are consistent across all human design metrics, then that'll probably change. And who
Well,
knows? If we have
who
this
knows? I
conversation
mean,
in a year.
it would be different. But I think what you're describing is it makes a lot of sense in terms of AML as an accelerant. And as it becomes mature, we start to find the places where it can be even more of an accelerant for the types of
Mhm.
problems that we're already trying to solve. And this is the period where we're trying to figure out where are those places? Where can we actually apply it effectively and whatnot? John, I want to thank you for an amazing conversation, and I really appreciate your giving some notion of where things are going. And I really would encourage folks to check out Expanded X and what you're doing and what you're up to, and keep an eye out for what comes next.
All right.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, Matt. Thanks a lot for having me.